I did not expect to care this much. Going into first Berserker Khazan, I thought I was signing up for another rage-fueled, steel-swinging Souls-like, a dark fantasy where gameplay took center stage and the story just filled the gaps. I thought that this was going to be simple, but what I got instead was something far more complex, heavier, a narrative with gravity. And it doesn't just dip its toes in human emotions, it drowns you in it. Where it's not just about the weight of loss, but the delicate interplay between the characters. What sets this game apart isn't just the blood, or the boss fights, or even betrayal. It is how deeply personal the story feels. Khazan isn't just angry, he's gutted. He's torn down, stripped of his body, his name, and everybody he's ever loved. And what rises from that ruin isn't just a man with a sword. It's a vessel for something much, much darker. Something that might look like strength, but feels a lot like grief wearing armor. And you watch this man, or some of the other victims in this story, become monsters, and you understand them. Not only that, you are rooting for the monsters to win. Yes, it's not that simple, and there are some moral grays, but I love it when a game can get you to sympathize and hope for the monster to win. And that is what this video is about. Not just what happened to Khazan, but why it matters. I know that this game is steeped in supernatural, but as I do on this channel, I try to relate and understand everything by grounding it in real-world psychology. Why does he do this, and what drives him to be like this? This isn't just a story about becoming a monster, it is a story about loss and trying to stop it. And what's left when no matter what you do, you can't stop loss? What happens when the only thing you have left is the rage that kept you alive? If you enjoy videos that explore video game characters with a psychological focus, join the chaos on my channel. Like the video if you're an Elamain and Balerion fan. Dislike the video if you love the Emperor. But all engagement is engagement. Spoilers ahead. And welcome to the Psychology of
the first Berserker, Khazan.
There is something strange that I noticed about Khazan. You see, for a man fueled by vengeance, he's calm, cold as steel in the shape of a man. Not mindless, not reckless, collected, precise, like he is always standing on the edge of something deeper. Not peace exactly, but something close. A silence, a stillness, the kind of calm that you only find after everything you love is already gone. Maybe it's just broken sadness, but then he fights, and that's gone. The wrath comes flooding back in, wild and brutal, like the sword was always the only language he had left. But once the blood settles, so does he, back to that eerie, quiet composure. There is a fine line between rage and peace, and on that line you will find serenity. Khazan walks this line like he was born in it, raised by it, but always one shift away from the edge. I think that makes him a compelling character. Before the world betrayed him, Khazan was its hero. Born outside the borders of Pelos' empire, raised in a barbarian tribe, he didn't inherit his place in the world, he fought for it. With nothing but grit, strategy, and raw tenacity, he rose from the dirt and carved his name into the Empire's history, not because he was welcome to, but because he refused to be ignored. And that journey matters, because when you build your sense of self through hardship and sacrifice, that identity becomes sacred. You need to understand that. And for Khazan, his identity wasn't built in comfort, it was forged in battle, sharpened by loyalty, and defined by the trust that he placed in the people he bled beside. But nobody stood closer to him than Ozma, the Archmage, the Empire's shield and Khazan's closest friend. And together they were legends. When the monstrous Berserk dragon Hismar rose to threaten humanity, It wasn't the nobles or the emperor who stood in its path. It was them. Khazan and Ozma, they were the strongest in the realm. They didn't just save the empire, they saved the world. But this is where things start to take a more insidious turn. When the heroes became too beloved, too respected, too irreplaceable, the very people they saved began to see them not as heroes, but as a threat. The Emperor took out the competition, and the Berserker's pain goes far beyond the scars on his body. What he suffers from is something deeper, something psychological that many soldiers and survivors of extreme betrayal go through: moral injury. Unlike trauma, which is about fear and physical danger, moral injury is about the collapse of your beliefs, your sense of right and wrong, because somebody that you trusted violated it. The term comes from Dr. Jonathan Shea, a military psychologist who studied combat veterans. He described it as what happens when somebody experiences a betrayal of what's right by someone who holds legitimate authority. Khazan gave everything to the Empire: his loyalty, his body, his victories, his trust. He didn't save the world because he wanted power or status. He did it because he believed it was the right thing to do. He believed in the cause, and the Empire took all of that and obliterated it. Psychologically, moral injury leads to overwhelming guilt, shame, anger, despair, not because the person failed, but because they feel like they were betrayed for doing the right thing. So what does he do with that anguish? He doesn't give up, he doesn't cry for help, he turns it into Berserker's rage. The only thing that still feels real, this primal force that was dormant in his core. That is why Khazan isn't just angry, he's pissed. Consumed by the need to make the emperor that betrayed him pay. That's not blind fury, it's the desperate attempt of a man trying to restore meaning to something that tore his soul in half. Because when moral injury takes root, it doesn't just change how you feel, it changes who you are. And if you're old enough or mature enough to know who you are, you probably understand just how world-breaking this is. But Khazan wasn't the only one betrayed. Ozma was hit with the same devastation. But for him, it wasn't just political betrayal, it was personal annihilation. He didn't just lose his status or his future, he lost Reese, his wife, his anchor, his reason. I love my wife. I especially understand Ozma. Top it off, he lost his brother too, Khazan. Because you gotta remember, these three were best friends since childhood. Friends are the family that you choose, and the Empire took that from them. They all died cold and separate deaths. When the Empire executed his wife without trial, without remorse, simply just for being associated with them, they tore out the center of Ozma's world. And when they mutilated him, took his eyes out, sent him to be executed, something cracked. And into that crack, chaos seeped in. Now, chaos magic in this world isn't just a power source, it is a psychological force, a corruptive influence that twists intention over time. It doesn't always make people evil outright, it often amplifies what's already broken inside of them, even if you happen to be the world's strongest sorcerer. For Ozma, the chaos exponentially intensified his grief. While Khazan became wrath, Ozma became obsession. He needed the world to make sense again. And when it didn't, he tried to rewrite it. To build a world where nobody could take his wife away. Where the hubris of man was impossible. Where death could be undone. And that is the real tragedy here. Ozma wasn't corrupted because he was evil. He was corrupted because he couldn't live with the moral contradiction of being a savior who lost everything because of a world that he protected. And when morality collapses and implodes in someone that brilliant, that wounded, and that powerful, you don't get healing. You get annihilation. You get a nightmare. you get Yarnum. You get someone who saw the truth too clearly and decided to bleed the world until it agreed with him. But to really understand the depth of what happened to both Khazan and Ozma, it helps to look at another tragic friendship. In Jujutsu Kaisen, there is a similar rift between two friends, Satoru Gojo and Suguru Geto. Like Khazan and Ozma, they were once united, two of the strongest sorcerers of their generation, bonded by purpose and shared trauma. But after a devastating failure, they went in opposite directions. Gojo chose to bear the burden of strength, isolating himself emotionally to protect others, non-sorcerers, regular humans. Geto, on the other hand, let his grief and moral outrage twist into something else, something darker. He began to believe the world was beyond saving, that people, the non-sorcerers, were the bane of life's existence, that only destruction would make sense of the pain. Sound familiar? Ozma and Geto both experienced what we've been talking about, but in their case, it metastasized. Instead of seeking justice, they sought control. Instead of healing, they rationalized vengeance as a form of balance. Both believed that the world was broken, and both convinced themselves that they were the only ones who could fix it. But Gojo never stopped loving his friend, even when they stood on opposite sides, and neither did Khazan. That is what makes these confrontations so devastating, because when you're fighting someone you used to believe in, you're not just battling their body, you're battling the memory of who they were. You're trying to survive the death of something you once called home. Being the best, the strongest, is isolating. Being at the top is lonely. And to be forced into a corner where you have to put your brother down, the only other person in the world who could have possibly understood you. It's detrimental, not just to your psyche, but to your soul. Khazan should have died in that snow. His body mutilated, broken, discarded. It was never meant to survive Mount Heinmich. But even on death's doorstep, Khazan didn't let go. Something in him refused to die. Something else answered. The Blade Phantom. A sentient spirit forged in ancient wars. But this wasn't some benevolent guardian angel. The Phantom was a parasite, one that needed a host strong enough to carry it. Which is why when it sensed Khazan, it immediately wanted his body. It offered Khazan a deal. Surrender your soul, and I'll give you back your strength tenfold. This is where the story shifts from tragedy to transformation. From a psychological lens, what happens here echoes the theory of post-traumatic growth, a concept introduced by psychologists Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun. It's the idea that some people, after experiencing profound trauma, don't just recover, they become something more, stronger, sharper, more focused, not despite the pain, but because of it. However, with Khazan, that growth comes at a steep cost. His body repairs itself, yes, his severed tendons reform, his strength returns, but it isn't healing in the traditional sense. He's not reclaiming who he was. He's not working through trauma. He's becoming something else, somebody new, someone built on vengeance. The man who served the Empire is dead and gone, but what stands up in his place is a revenant. And that is what is so powerful about this moment, because it isn't just the return of a warrior, it is the creation of a new identity, one forged not by legacy or loyalty, but by wrath. Rage becomes his compass, the Phantom becomes his heartbeat, and survival, it's not just about breathing anymore, it's about purpose. This isn't healing, it's weaponization, and it works. Throughout the story, Khazan isn't just haunted by betrayal, he is haunted by the ghosts of everybody he has failed to save. His men who died simply for their allegiance to him, friends like Elamain, Scalpel, Reese, even Ozma himself, twisted into unrecognizable forms by chaos, forced into battles he neither wanted nor could he avoid. There is a psychological weight here that holds deeper than rage. It is called survivor's guilt, a concept first described by psychologist William Niederland while working with Holocaust survivors. Now, at its core, survivor's guilt is the torment of living through something unbearable when others did not. For Khazan, this guilt manifests as an unending nightmare, because each time that he cuts down a former friend, he's not just confronting an enemy, he is reliving his failure to protect them. He might not show it explicitly, but in glimpses and moments where he closes his eyes, turns away, or looks melancholic as he watches another friend he failed to save pass away, one can see the remorse. And that guilt compounds, layering itself over and over with every loss. Eventually, this persistent inability to save those he cares about leads to something even darker, an emotional numbing, Khazan's loss of humanity as he becomes hollow. By the time Khazan admits that he's got nothing left to offer but violence, it's an acknowledgement of emptiness. Each ally lost, and every soul consumed by chaos strips away parts of him piece by piece, leaving behind only an empty vessel. This is why his journey feels heavier as it progresses. Khazan is not only losing his friends, but himself, one blade swing at a time. And if you pay attention, you feel that weight too. But Khazan doesn't carry that weight alone. There is something else inside of him now, something watching, whispering, pushing. The phantom may just be that, a phantom, but what it feeds on, what it grows from, is deeply human. It's not just a spirit of vengeance, it is the embodiment of everything Khazan can't say out loud or articulate for himself. The phantom is a representation of the pain that he can't process, the rage he had to bury. This is what Carl Jung called the shadow, the part of ourselves we repress, the instincts that we're ashamed of, the violence we hide by civility. The phantom isn't just latched to Khazan's body, it is rooted in his mind. Throughout the game, it even talks to him, many times trivializing the sadness and the anguish he feels, but towards the end, whenever Khazan begins to let himself fall into mourning, the phantom keeps him in check, reminds him to focus up on the objective. He starts to respect Khazan, and that's the terrifying thing. The phantom isn't changing him, it is encouraging and enabling what is already inside of Khazan to come to surface, inciting him to converge his inner feelings and direct it outwards like whenever he transforms. That's why it's not possession, it's permission. Psychologically, we can also view this as repression unraveling. Freud described repression as the mind's way of burying painful or socially unacceptable thoughts so deeply that we forget that they're even there. This is different from suppression, which is a conscious effort to push thoughts away, but trauma digs it up. And what the Empire did to Khazan? It was an excavation. They hollowed him out, and in that gaping hole, Blade Phantom would take its place. Every time the Phantom speaks, it's speaking from the part of Khazan that no longer cares about honor, the part that is done trying to be a hero. At first, Khazan resists because the Phantom wasn't asking, it just wanted a host, another body, another soul to add to its repertoire of warrior souls he's amassed throughout the ages. And so Khazan would undergo a ritual to sever the Phantom's grip, but the ritual doesn't cleanse him, it confirms him. The Phantom saw this, recognized this, and in the trials when the general faces his fallen comrades, when he's forced to confront the ghosts of men who died for him because of him, the voice doesn't leave, it tests him. Despite Blade Phantom mocking how Khazan feels, he still shows masterful control and resilience over himself and his emotions. And by the end of their battle over his mind, Khazan doesn't exorcise the Phantom. He makes a pact with it because he knows he can't win without it. In psychology, we call this shadow integration. Jung believed that healing wasn't about purging the shadow. It was about owning it, making peace with the deepest, darkest parts of yourself and using them instead of being ruled by them. This is concisely what Khazan does, and we can see this as the start of his own enlightenment. He's not healed, not yet, and maybe a man like him never will be, but now he's aligned. Every blow he strikes, every soul he claims, every step deeper into vengeance he takes not as the man he used to be, but as the weapon the world turned him into. However, When the only thing holding you together is rage, what happens when that begins to run dry? When his body failed, when his honor was gone, when even hope turned to ash, vengeance thrashed in. It gave him motion, purpose, and when that rage fused with the phantom, it gave him power. But revenge is a shallow well, and eventually you will hit the bottom. Rage is an emotion, a powerful one at that, but it does get exhausted. Wrath gets tired. What's left for him isn't strength, it's erosion. Piece by piece, every step forward costs him something. Every single person who meant something, who represented something to him, he killed them. A memory, a friendship, a part of his humanity. Revenge doesn't return any of that, it only demands more. He never speaks about regret, but you can feel it in the way that he closes his eyes and turns his back to Elamine when she disappears, in the way that he answers certain questions, in the way that his victories feel like funerals. By the time he slays Scalpel, the friend who once fought beside him, it's not triumph, it's attrition, and the weight of that starts to show. Him desperately grasping at straws and begging Phantom to help him somehow save Reese is heart-wrenching because he can only kill her now. The face of devastation and bewilderment at him driving his blade through Ozma, his brother, is world-shattering. Khazan isn't becoming free, he's becoming hollow. This is where we start to see the collapse of identity, and in psychology that collapse is called ego death. It's not literal death, it is the diminishment of the story that we tell ourselves about who we are. The hero's identity was shaved down to a revenant, but even that identity begins to wear thin. When every enemy is a former friend, when your victories leave you emptier than your defeats, when even the justice that you chase feels like desecration, who are you? What are you? Really? A blade with no wielder, a man with no name, a purpose with no peace. That is what revenge costs, and he keeps paying the price, because what else is he supposed to do? He can't go back, there's nothing to return to. His journey isn't about reclamation of life, it's about outlasting the pain of losing it. And in that sense, Khazan becomes more than a man, he becomes what the world made him. A consequence. A walking repercussion of betrayal bound together by rage that no longer burns, it smolders. And once even that fades, if you give up on everything to become vengeance, who are you when vengeance is over? After all of the rage, all of the grief, after the blood and the bodies, there is only silence. And in that silence, Khazan is left with a question no sword can answer. What now? Meaninglessness. This is the heart of existential psychology, a field rooted in the work of Viktor Frankl, Rollo May, and Irvin Yalom. Unlike other psychological theories, existential psychology doesn't focus on what's wrong with you. It focuses on the void, the abyss, what is missing. Man's search for meaning in a universe that is too big to care. What do we live for when everything we've lived for is gone? For Khazan, it's not hypothetical. At some points in the game, you realize Khazan isn't really chasing justice anymore. He's not even chasing revenge. He is chasing some semblance of a conclusion, a finish line, a finality to give his suffering shape. But that isn't meaning. This is what Frankl, a Holocaust survivor himself and psychiatrist, called existential vacuum, the emotional state that arises when a person can no longer find purpose in their suffering. It isn't sadness, it's a spiritual dead zone, a space where nothing feels real anymore. That is what makes Khazan such an impactful character. He is not fearless, he is untethered. There's no reason to fight beyond momentum itself, and that is the paradox. In existential terms, this is his last stand, not just against chaos, but the absurdity. Philosopher Albert Camus wrote that to live in a meaningless world and still choose to go on, to still choose to fight, is an act of rebellion. He called it revolt without resignation. For a man in Khazan's situation, the act of continuing is the meaning. In an alternate ending of the game, revenge is the only thing Khazan has left. Maybe for him, that is the closest thing to peace he will ever get.